Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. It is much cooler than it was last week. Can you not agree? I mean, the fact is I'm wearing a jacket today, which I will take off immediately upon finishing this. We want to thank you again for coming to our third lecture, our 66th speaker for Advocates for Balance at Chautauqua. And I have to say again, as I say every single week, without your support, your financial support, and sometimes even more importantly, your moral support, we could not be doing this. And we have been successful the last 7 years, and when I look back at the roster of people that we've had here, it is remarkable. And probably 3/4 of them could have been over there, okay? But nevertheless, you had the privilege of seeing them for the most part. We want to thank you. Your financial support is very welcome. In the past, we've had matching grants. Remember those? The last couple of years, we had people who give serious money and then we match it. The fact is, nobody's given serious money this year. So we have, we don't want to match $200, we want to match something bigger than that. So if any of you, either individually or collectively, want to get together to do a matching grant, we'll announce it next week, if that's the case. We are actually Zooming this live on YouTube, and we have not made this public because we're working out some bugs, okay? And before people tune into it and then find out they can't see anything or can't hear anything, we want to get it right, but it's Zooming live into YouTube. And by tomorrow or the next day, it will be posted on YouTube. It will be edited. And it's not, John V., who is our cameraman, is taking multiple shots and close-ups and all that kind of stuff. This is just a wide shot of everything. But the talk is there. And we're able to close caption it, too. And for those of you who were here for Willie Soon last week, you need the closed captioning. At the end of Dr. McCullough's talk, there will be a Q&A as usual, and we're going to get a little closer to the podium today because we want to get the Zoom mic so they can hear the question and we can go back and forth. As usual, you come up on this side, I will hold the mic, you will speak a question, not a dissertation, and make it terse and pithy, as they used to say, okay? Let's see. We do not edit any questions. We don't vet them like they do sometimes on the main stage. Anything that comes up here, and we advise the speakers thusly that, be prepared for accolades and maybe not accolades at some point. And I'm going to say that we have these clear plastic bags, which we're giving away to you on the way out if you have not got one. You don't need to get one for the scout troop, okay? Just yours, or you can pick them up. And in addition to that, we have autographed copies of Dr. McCullough's latest book, which has not yet been not yet made public. It will become viable on July 29th. It's called Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, Reality. Okay? And you'll get that free when you walk out of here. There will be a Goodwill donation basket next to it if you choose to drop something in there for it. It retails for $32, but you can pick one up and it'll be autographed as you go out. Okay? Let's see here. I think that does it for me. Now, instrumental in Dr. McCullough's appearance here is one of our board members, the secretary, Anita Price, and I would like her to introduce Dr. McCullough. Anita?
Thank you. I am honored to do so. It is such a pleasure to welcome Dr. McCullough here today. And he's probably most well known for his early outpatient treatment approach of COVID-19. He is an internist, a cardiologist, an epidemiologist holding degrees from Baylor University, University of Texas Southwestern Medical School, University of Michigan, and Southern Methodist University. Dr. McCullough has broadly published on a range of topics in medicine, with over 1,000 publications and 700 citations in the National Library of Medicine, and has been a global public figure in medicine for many years. We are very, very grateful to have him. He has dozens of peer-reviewed publications on the COVID infection and has commented extensively on the medical response to the COVID crisis, including testifying multiple times in the U.S. Senate and beyond. And Paul already told you about that great book that is just hot off the press out there, so do really take advantage of that opportunity and get one of those today. Share them with your friends. And I just want to say, please join me in welcoming Dr. Peter McCullough and his wife, Maha. Maha in the front row.
Thank you. Thanks for that introduction, and thanks to each and every one of you for attending here at Chautauqua. Such a place of history, of dialectic or interchange, and probably some of the most important conversations that have gone on here have not been in the amphitheater. They've been in hotel rooms and on porches, and have gone on into the wee hours of the night. But it's about intellectual interchange. That's what this place is all about. And I was born not too far from here. I was born in Buffalo, New York. And so my family had been from that area. Both my mother and father were high school sweethearts at Kenmore West High School there in Kenmore, New York. And as life had its turns, because of economics, we moved to Texas in the 1970s. And so I finished my schooling in Texas and then ultimately set up roots there. Since I've been in Texas, the population has doubled. If you can imagine that type of velocity of change for states like Texas and California. I've made the observation now as a medical doctor and someone who was in the public view for many years before the pandemic, that we've entered a time now of great controversy. And I think we all agree something is off. It's almost as if the biomedical world is off its axis. People tell me over and over again they don't have trust, that they've lost trust in their doctors or nurses or public health agencies or governments. I hear this all over the world, by the way. There's nothing I'm going to say today that doesn't apply elsewhere in the world. And I've traveled through the course of the pandemic, I've traveled to enough regions in the world to understand whatever's going on is going on simultaneously. So as introduced, I'm Dr. Peter McCullough. I'm in practice as an internist and a cardiologist. I'm trained as an epidemiologist. I am in full-time practice. I'm also the president of McCullough Foundation, a not-for-profit organization, and I'm the chief scientific officer of the Wellness Company, a new healthcare alternative for the country and the world. So I've been very, very active. Many of you see me on TV. I was on national primetime TV well over 100 times during the course of the pandemic, and I was asked for my opinion. I just have testified in the U.S. Senate, again, multiple times, because I'm asked for my opinion. And what I'm going to give you today is my opinion. And I'm free to do so, and we're all free to exchange our ideas, and that's the whole purpose of Chautauqua. I'm going to make the point that our current situation in medicine has happened before. There have been at least two major examples in American history where the medical orthodoxy or the medical establishment was completely wrong on a major set of concepts and issues, and great harm was done to the population. The first is what I call the first great cocaine epidemic. It's very important. If you were a Chautauquan around the time of 1900, and you had an ailment here, and you sought a doctor, it's very likely that doctor, as a remedy, would give you some form of elixir of cocaine. It's extremely likely that that would have happened. So the great cocaine epidemic, I essentially pinpoint between 1860 and 1920, around that time frame. And here are the sources that I'm going to cite here. Listen to the titles. These are modern papers listed in the National Library of Medicine, but listen to the titles. This is astonishing. Joseph Spillane, title, Cocaine, Medical Marvel to Modern Menace, United States, 1884 to 1920. Second one, Wydenga and Gilchrist, From Gold Medal Glory to Prohibition, the Early Evolution of Cocaine in the United Kingdom and the United States. And the third one, Douglas Small, Cocaine in the Ideal Victorian Medical Man. The entire country became hooked on cocaine. The major products of Merck and Park Davis, which later became Pfizer, were cocaine products. Many of you know that cocaine was in Chianti wine, Coca-Cola. It was everywhere, and the medical establishment was fully engaged. Major leaders in medicine, William Halsted, the father of modern surgery, used cocaine in 1884 as a general anesthetic, himself became a brutal cocaine addict. Sigmund Freud, he said that cocaine could replace asylums in 1885 in a publication. By 1890, Freud was hooked on cocaine. It became an absolute horror show. It was so bad the companies recognized this. 1889, cocaine was removed from Pemberton French wine. 1903, cocaine removed from Coca-Cola. Woodrow Wilson signed the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act in 1914, and then the British Dangerous Drug Act in 1920. Doctors could not police themselves. The government had to step in and say, listen, we're shutting this down. We're shutting down cocaine. From 1860 to 1920, there were only 129 publications raising concern about cocaine in the medical literature, and they came late. Lancet published 70, British Medical Journal published 33, New England Journal of Medicine published 25, and JAMA published one paper expressing concern. The medical orthodoxy got it wrong on cocaine, and great harm was realized by the U.S. population and populations all over the world. Second epic. Most of you have lived through this one. Smoking. Time period, 1920 to 1964. 1920, American Tobacco had the Lucky Strikes advertising campaign. Philip Morris. R.J. Reynolds did a survey of 113,000 doctors who regularly offered and promoted cigarettes to their patients. It was everywhere. The majority of doctors smoked. The majority of patients smoked. If you were a Chautauquan here in 1940, chances are you'd be smoking right here. Chances are the lecturer or the doctor would be smoking. Doctors smoked in operating rooms. You're laughing. They smoked everywhere. Who are the heroes during this great, what I call the Great Smoke Fest? Sir Austin Bradford Hill, an epidemiologist in the UK, statistician, and Richard Dahl. Richard Dahl was a medical doctor. They published a paper in the British Medical Journal in 1950, and they found a 4-fold increased risk of cancer among smokers. No one believed them. No one wanted to believe them. All the doctors smoked. It can't be the case. They persisted, and they conducted the British Doctors Smokers Study, a study done in doctors, 40,701 doctors followed over 3 years. Of the deaths, 50% of the deaths were due to smoking-related causes like lung cancer. The medical community rejected this. Dahl, the medical doctor, was persecuted. He was canceled. If he had a Twitter account, he would have been wiped off of Twitter. The tobacco industry went after him with vehemence, and so did the medical establishment. What are the sources? Gardner and Brandt. This is a modern-day paper. Doctor's Choice is American's Choice, about cigarettes. And then Conrad Keating, who wrote about Sir Richard Dahl, who became ultimately knighted, Smoking Kills, the revolutionary life of Richard Dahl. Dahl lived to age 93. He lived long enough to see he was right. But you know, in 1950 and in 1954, when these data came in, Mayo Clinic didn't change their policy on smoking. They smoked. So did Cleveland Clinic. Smoked here in Chautauqua, no one cared. It was Luther Terry, a Surgeon General in 1964, compiled the Surgeon General report on smoking, called all the chiefs of medicine to Washington and said, you know what, guys and girls, I've got bad news. Smoking causes lung cancer. So a common person, a lay person would say, wait a minute, these lung cancers they take out, they're kind of blackened looking tumors. The smoke is kind of grayish black. The smoke is kind of going in the lungs. It's not a hard reach to think that smoking would be a cause of lung cancer. The medical community was completely wrong on this. And they didn't turn on a dime in 1964. They still smoked. The American Medical Association was completely silent on this until 1972, and they launched their first campaign about the harms of smoking. People got to the point where they didn't trust their doctors or the medical establishment on these two issues, cocaine in the past and smoking in the present. It ultimately came down to the Great Tobacco Settlement and then these, what people call draconian legislation that essentially outlaws smoking in, workplaces, including the healthcare workplace. But the medical community, and I was charitable. I gave them 44 years on smoking. It was dead wrong. Okay, 60 years on cocaine, dead wrong. That brings us into our modern medical controversy. The modern one. Is it possible that with the COVID-19 pandemic, the medical community and the public health agencies and governments could have gotten it wrong on many aspects of what we all observed? So we can take some commonsensical things. Never before in human history did we quarantine a well person who doesn't have the illness in order to stop spread of the illness. It's never been done. Quarantines actually work for yellow fever. They work for things. If someone's sick with the influenza, they can go home and stay away from other people. But instead, it was the inverse, that everybody should go into quarantine or lockdown. In some places, that lockdown lasted years. Completely wrong. It's never been done before, and it's astonishing more people didn't question it. How about wearing masks? Should people wear masks? Should well people wear masks who don't have the disease in order to stop spreading the disease they don't have? No. No, traditionally we wear masks, and I wear masks when we go into the hospital to protect the vulnerable patient who's in the ICU or in the operating room or the cardiac catheterization laboratory. So we obviously got it wrong on masks. We had to have had it wrong. So masks and lockdowns, they actually violated just common sense. If you do things to well people without the disease, it's not going to influence the disease. Most of this was predicated on the idea that we could avoid getting this illness. We could dodge it. We could dodge the bullet. Turns out, very good data suggests 97% of people contracted COVID-19. 97% of people. Everyone got it. So if we would have had better predictions and better advice, it's to say, listen, we're all going to get this. We have to get through it together. Instead, this, locking down well people, masking. Remember contact tracing? You don't hear too much about the dollars spent on contact tracing. Who touched who are you in communication with? All of that was predicated on the fact that somehow it was a contagion and you could avoid getting it. Then we were told that this infection from the beginning was unassailable. It cannot be treated. Cannot be treated. Untreatable. Nothing you can do. President Trump said, our answer is we're going to have General Motors produce ventilators. I was on a National Institutes of Health call in March of 2020, and I'll never forget that call, where people were reporting early on, they were at their medical centers, we're saying, well, what's happening at Johns Hopkins? What's happening at Emory? And they'll just say, listen, we don't know what this infection is, but I can tell you this much, the ventilator's not saving them. Early reports, our ventilator mortality rates were 90%. Sadly, virtually every death that occurred in the pandemic occurred in the hospital. Virtually everyone. People just didn't die at home. Very different than the Spanish flu. So we saw a series of what we call narratives come out. And the narratives were perfectly timed all over the world. They happened simultaneously. One of them came out in 2020, and you could see it in the media in Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, South America, United States, and it was on the same day. And the same phrase, no one is safe. No one is safe. A fear-based message in 2020. What are we supposed to do with that? Outside of become more afraid. Who gave the orders? How is it so perfectly timed? Another one in 2021. It's a crisis on the unvaccinated. How do we know? How can it be that case all over? Some countries, had a big uptake in vaccines. Some had few. In the United States, when it's all said at the end of the day, 70% of Americans became initially fully vaccinated. They took 2 shots. 70%. 30% didn't. Among Caucasians, 50% became fully vaccinated. 50% didn't. Among African Americans, only 44%. So it wasn't going to be the vaccine that was going to be the differential here. But we were told through a whole series of actions, which ultimately, really had teeth to them, that the virus was untreatable. In fact, it shouldn't be treated with anything. Nothing to treat the virus until patients were in the hospital. All forms of early treatment were suppressed. All forms. Even from simple nasal sprays and gargles, which had evolving clinical trial evidence, which was very positive. Vitamin D, nutraceuticals, aspirin, zinc, quercetin, over-the-counter famotidine. Doctors were finding success in treating COVID-19. I was one of them. I was the first to publish the first peer-reviewed multi-drug, multi-agent protocol to reduce the risk of hospitalization and death. And I didn't stop there. I used the best methods I could at the time, moving rapidly, demonstrating it reduced the risk of hospitalization and death by 85%. So of course we must start early in an elderly person at risk, on day one, just like we would with influenza, and just like we would with pneumococcal pneumonia. The SARS-CoV-2 virus was no different. This is the first time in human history we were told, don't treat the illness until people are so sick and they need oxygen in the hospital to start treatment. So all forms of treatment were suppressed via a variety of mechanisms. In Europe, they had prohibitions on various forms of treatment. In the United States, we had our Federal Trade Commission that was severe, and they pursued companies making vitamin D. They tried to shut down nasal sprays and gargles. That's our Federal Trade Commission. Our FDA conducted a war against 2 drugs used, hydroxychloroquine, used in the first year of the pandemic. We didn't have any government-supplied oral drugs besides hydroxychloroquine. And then we found ivermectin seemed to be more useful in the second year of the pandemic. It wasn't until the third year that we had kind of government EUA-approved Paxlovid. So for 2 years, what were we supposed to do? And we found all forms of treatment were suppressed. Even our high-tech monoclonal antibodies, Operation Warp Speed, they were always safe, always effective, could never find them. We had 6 of them. Our government took them off the market within a few weeks of the market entry, over and over again. Much to the frustration of everyone. Leave these on the market. We had purchased enough of these to treat every single senior citizen in the country. Yet we couldn't find them. And sadly, the deaths that occurred in the pandemic, almost to a 1, occurred in people who had received, almost to a 1, occurred in people who had received no early treatment or grossly inadequate early treatment. Only 15% of people received these life-saving monoclonal antibodies before the hospitalization, yet they were all seen in the ER before they were hospitalized. We can't explain the wave of therapeutic nihilism that came down on medicine, but it came down all over. That was just part of it. The second was, as strong as the suppression of early treatment was by government agencies, medical societies, medical organizations, hospital systems, as strong as that suppression of early treatment was equally as strong as the relentless promotion of vaccination. For every doctor who said, "Oh, I don't treat COVID," they'll say, "Take a vaccine." "Oh, I don't think hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, aspirin, vitamin D, colchicine, prednisone, famotidine, heparin, Paxlovid, monoclonal antibodies, I don't think any of that works, but you should take a vaccine." Most doctors actually, shamefully, did not treat their COVID patients. Every patient who died with COVID-19 made desperate calls to their doctors. "Please, my grandmother's sick, do something." "Sorry, my hands are tied. I can't treat it." We've never seen this. It was complete agony to watch this occur. I wasn't going to let that happen at my watch. I did everything I could. I published the best protocols in the best journals. I showed that they worked. I organized people the best of my ability. And thankfully, the McCullough protocol's been credited with saving millions of lives and sparing hundreds of millions of hospitalizations because it was used worldwide. And we had good people all over the world embracing these principles. Now, when the vaccines rolled out, Pfizer, and then a week later, Moderna, there was 1 month where the 2 injections were given, and then just 2 months of observation. That's it. There's just 3 months of time. 3 months. No one could have known on month 4 what would happen. No one. Yet doctors said they're safe, they're effective, take it in the arm, you're good, it's going to last forever. By April of 2021, Anthony Fauci comes out and says, bad news, we need boosters. Because it's not working. Because the vaccines were obviously not working by April of 2021. By August of 2021, Rochelle Lewinsky, our CDC director, came out and said, bad news, the vaccines don't stop spread of the infection. That's the reason why most people were taking them. They were taking them to protect others. That's the reason why I took it, to stop the spread of infection. They didn't stop the spread of infection. So the vaccines did not stop people getting COVID-19, did not stop transmission, and there's not a single prospective, double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trial or a valid observational study that shows the vaccines reduced the risk of hospitalization and death. And yet a false claim was born that the vaccines failed on everything except for they saved lives. That became the final false claim. The final fallback. They don't do anything else, but they save lives. It's a false belief. It's a false. Even the consent form for the vaccines does not indicate as a benefit that it reduces mortality. It's a false claim. The FDA would not allow that false claim. But yet it's been said over and over again by our leaders, by doctors, others, that vaccines save lives. Only if people who died with COVID would have taken the vaccine. Where does this come from? It comes from, and in our book, which you'll pick up as you leave, it comes from an ideology. What we've uncovered is that vaccines over hundreds of years have, in a sense, taken on a religious-like nature in medicine and in public health. It starts very early on with bold claims made. Bold claims that, you're going to get the smallpox vaccine and you'll be spared smallpox. And we go through this in the book. We start out, smallpox vaccination occurred long before Edward Jenner in the UK, for instance. It was going on here in the United States. Benjamin Franklin, well known for taking the smallpox vaccine. In fact, we emphasize in the first part of our book about a Puritan minister. His name is Cotton Mather. Cotton Mather. His father was a puritanical minister. He became so enthralled with smallpox vaccination that him and Dr. Boylston did a whole series of studies. And they published it actually long before Edward Jenner in the UK was even born. He became a vaccine zealot, Cotton Mather. He went so far to say publicly he believed vaccines came from God. They were a gift from God. Why wouldn't he think this? You know, he lost his wife and several kids to measles. Why wouldn't he think this? Why would Ben Franklin be a convert? Well, he lost little Frankie to smallpox. So the theme early on and how the mythology was born was that at that time they didn't even know what caused these diseases. They called it either filth or grease or poison. They didn't know it was a virus or a bacteria. The causative agents weren't known. They couldn't have known. But this idea of take it and take it on faith is very important. It's part of the ideology. And even if there's harm, and there was great harm early on with virtually every vaccine, particularly smallpox and then polio and pertussis vaccines, the feeling was, listen, as part of the ideology, these vaccines have almost like a religious property to them. There's a hubris that man, through science, can improve upon God's creation. But the vaccines aren't perfect. And so in order for this to work, everyone must take them. And if some people are harmed or some people lose their life, sorry, they have to take it for the betterment of humanity. This was memorialized in the 1986 Vaccine Injury Compensation Act in the United States as the fervor of what I call vaccinism. Vaccinism, that's part of this controversy we're in, of just more and more vaccines, more and more and more. It got to a breaking point. There were so many litigation cases, and that occurred under President Reagan. And in the 1986 Vaccine Injury Compensation Act, in the legislation, it says vaccines have unavoidable harms. Some people are going to be harmed by them. And because of that, the vaccine manufacturers must be free of any threat of liability or litigation. Only medicinal product that we've gotten that far. So after 1986, there was an absolute blossoming of vaccines that came on the market. Very little research, no large prospective, double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trials, and no studies of vaccines given in large combinations. It appears as if we're at a breaking point now. We've come to a breaking point because now we have an epidemic of childhood illnesses that is coming like a tsunami in children. When I was a kid, the rate of autism spectrum disorder was 1 in 10,000. Our CDC has just reported, as of 2022, it's 1 in 31. It's 3.2% of the US population with adjudicated real autism. Some states, even worse. California, it's 5% of kids. Of those who have autism, 27% of that group has profound autism, defined as an IQ less than 55 head banging, repetitive behaviors, nonverbal, will never use the toilet unassisted in their lives. That's more than 1% of California children. This should be an absolute 5-alarm fire going off in the schools of public health all over the United States. Do you know not a single school of public health even has a seminar on the autism epidemic in the United States? No alarm. At the McCullough Foundation, we've interviewed tons of people for our fellowship program. I said, do you have any seminars, courses, anything about the childhood chronic, scourge of autism? Nothing, no mention. Do you know in the CDC report on autism, once they gave us the bad news, it just came out in MMWR a few months ago, do you know their conclusion was, oh well, we should just get ready for more special needs care for these children. No search into the causative factors, no search into treatments, remedies of any type. It's an absolute disaster, but it's not just autism, it's allergic diseases, food allergies, medicinal allergies, asthma, allergic dermatitis, urticaria, recurrent infections, other neurologic disorders like tics and seizures and attention deficit disorder. It's now about half of children have some medical problem. That wasn't the case when you and I were children. You must admit something has changed. Something has changed. It was less than 10 years ago that Harvard and the Ivy League schools formed new units of medicine treating gender dysphoria in what's called transgender medicine. It was brand new. Listen, I was at a major medical center. We never had a grand rounds on it. We never even had a discussion on it. It just literally came out of nowhere just before the pandemic. Now research shows the vast majority of young people who are not happy with their gender, they have gender dysphoria, and they move forward for gender change clinical care, have autism. They have autism. That explains it. You'd kind of wonder, who would do this? I mean, in total, I can tell you as a doctor, and I've provided a report to the Texas Surgeon General on this as a doctor, transgender medicine, giving puberty blockers, androgen estrogens, and the surgeries, in total, in the peer-reviewed published literature, is sterilizing, disfiguring, increases the burden of psychiatric care, and increases the risk of all-cause mortality. It's a disaster. It's a complete disaster of children who do have a neuropsychiatric problem at baseline, but changing their gender and administering hormones is obviously not the solution. It's so heinous, it's been banned in 25 states. President Trump has pulled funding for the schools to do this. Again, doctors not policing themselves. They didn't do it during COVID, they didn't do it during smoking, and they didn't do it during cocaine, and they're not doing it during transgender medicine. Former Dean of the University of Pennsylvania, you should have him here, Stan Goldfarb. Stan and I have published before in the past. He was so outraged with what he was seeing with transgender medicine, he formed his own not-for-profit called Do No Harm. And in Do No Harm, he shows up at the Endocrine Society meetings and the other meetings, and he presents the counter-argument that doctors are in some type of zealotry over gender change. And it literally came out of nowhere. The same type of zealotry towards relentless, unabated, increasing, and in my opinion, reckless mass vaccination. We now have vaccines administered in large numbers to pregnant women. It never happened. All of you ladies here, likely you received no vaccines during pregnancy. Now it's full on for vaccines. A baby today receives between 12 and months 16 different vaccine products all at once. As a medical doctor, if I prescribe 16 drugs to you all at once, I promise you, you would have side effects. There's impossible not to have side effects. So, in summary, we have entered a time of great controversy. This last segment, I think the pandemic has ushered in, and now a focus on vaccinism and transgenderism. Remember, the isms are the great concern here. In our book, we cite Oliver Wendell Holmes. And Oliver Wendell Holmes says that science, in particular medical science, is the topography of ignorance. And medicine and the medical community, doctors and nurses and others, they don't have a track record where they realize when they're on the wrong track and rapidly correct. So it's up to you as public citizens and those concerned to start raising your concerns and helping us, in a sense, come out of this great medical controversy so we can certainly be on the right side of history. I'm Dr. Peter McCullough. Thank you so much for listening.
Yes, ma'am.
I work in healthcare in New York State, was vaccinated and boosted. I had, prior to that, had hip surgeries for both hips and cancer, never developed blood clots. Well, I developed blood clots. I've been tested multiple times, multiple facilities, Cleveland Clinic, 2 functional medicine doctors. I worked in cardiology in the hospital in Buffalo. I saw 6 cardiologists that I know and work with, 2 pulmonologists, neurologists, sleep doctors, and now I have blood clots. How can I help with that, with the unpleasantness of life?
Well, let me say, listen, I want everyone to not ask personal medical questions in front of everyone else, but let me just say in general, the AstraZeneca and the Janssen vaccines are off the market because they cause so much blood clots. And of course, Pfizer and Moderna cause blood clots. They produce a protein called the spike protein, and it's found in the blood clots. So for sure, a patient who, is perfectly fine has no reason to. Now, let me say it's my experience that both the infection and the vaccines connotate risk for blood clots. So I do a careful history. This is something for you and your doctors. Your doctors better do a careful history and document how many times you've had COVID and how many vaccines you've taken. If they are ignoring that, they're ignoring a very important part of your medical history.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to Chautauqua and for talking about the gender dysphoria and autism relationship. That's something that interests me a lot. And we now know that these 2 epidemics are happening simultaneously, and they're being treated psychologically and sociologically under this umbrella of neurodiversity. What would your recommendation be that we do about these kids who think they're in the wrong gender body?
Well, the important point about neurodiversity, and there is neurologic diversity, is that it falls in the line, like with the American Disabilities Act. There are people who have multiple sclerosis. We shouldn't discriminate against them. Some people are in wheelchairs. Some people have had strokes. There is neurodiversity. But what we shouldn't do is normalize a neuropsychiatric disease. Autism is a neuropsychiatric disease. The link with transgenderism is very strong. And when we examine autism, let me just say this, people have said, well, what's the cause of autism? As an internist and cardiologist, I can tell you there's no single cause of heart disease. We have risk factors that we study that are emerging. The established risk factors for autism are parents of an older age, delivery of a baby before 37 weeks, there are some common genetic variants, and then mass vaccination. Those are the risk factors for autism. So in at least half a dozen studies now, the children who take no vaccines whatsoever have much lower rates of autism. They don't have 0. You can find autistic kids. So vaccination in combination should be considered among others in this constellation of factors that should be intensively studied, because of those that I mentioned, it's a potentially modifiable risk factor.
Dr. McCullough, I'm Dr. Art Kellerman, like you, I'm an academic. I work as an emergency physician, internist, was a medical school lead. I have to say with great respect, sir, we're on opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to this issue. You mentioned several times today you're a board-certified internist, or you said you're an internist and cardiologist. Could you explain your current board certification status? And if it is not full, why it isn't? Because I'm concerned disinformation is what's fueling the rampant controversy today. And I've heard more disinformation this evening than I have heard from the speaker in quite some time.
Be careful with your use of a propaganda term. Disinformation comes right out of Nazi Germany, comes right out of post-Stalinist Russia. When you say disinformation, you're trying to exert leverage over me, like you hold the truth and I don't. You and I can have a fair interchange of information. I would never use that term on you. I would never use a derogatory propaganda term on you. I would never do it. My board certification status for decades was with the American Board of Internal Medicine. It's now with the National Board of American Physicians and Surgeons. The American Board of Internal Medicine pursued me on a COVID misinformation policy that they put in place in September of 2021 for my testimony under oath in March of 2021 in the US Senate, when I couldn't have ever known there was a policy, let alone what the guardrails that they would put on. So they went ex post facto, did not provide equal protections. I was targeted. It became an embroiled legal matter for years. And then I resigned from the American Board of Internal Medicine. I voluntarily certified and I voluntarily resigned. To this day, they use my research for their board questions. So we should never, ever sling around propaganda terms at one another. It's not a good way to practice.
Thank you, sir, for coming to speak at Chautauqua. I have two questions that both kind of go together. My first question is, what is RFK doing in the as Secretary of Health to help make sure that this doesn't happen again in the future with vaccines? And as young Republicans who are going through the university system currently and aspiring to hopefully be in Congress or representatives one day, what can you do to ensure that this doesn't happen again? I also want to say that I liked when, I believe it was Pete Hegseth, when they came out with on the White House website about the COVID vaccination information and how it disrupted the military and all these things that did to our country. If you can speak on that, please. Thank you.
Well, the new administration has made great strides. When I recently testified in the Senate in May of 2021, 2025, May 21st, 2025, the press, as soon as I walked out of the Senate chambers, approached me. I said, Dr. McCullough, how is Trump doing in the new administration? I said, well, I give him a B+. A B+, right? And I think our role, you're asking, what we can do, our role is to demand better, right? So if we don't demand better, our public servants aren't going to get better. So RFK is trying to get oriented. He's, not been confronted with running a large organization in the past, never been a government official, not a doctor. And he's, approaching aspects of health through nutrition. He's, working to build a new vaccine panel. He's going to have an insider head the CDC, new NIH and FDA commissioners. And so I still think the jury is out on what he's doing. I do think it's interesting that most people can't even recall what Alex Azar and Xavier Becerra did as HHS secretaries. I mean, now Kennedy is in the public view all the time. So Kennedy and Trump have brought us great hope that we'll see bona fide.
Charged with things like disinformation, and you just referenced God's creation. Is there something transcendent about you, in addition to your accurate observation in science, that leads you to challenge the mainstream rhetoric of transgenderism and vaccinism?
When I first started out in cardiology, I made an observation that patients who had kidney disease had markedly accelerated in different courses of heart disease. And when I first made that observation, I was crushed. No, it's not due to this. It's due to cholesterol and diabetes and blood pressure. And I was in the back room at the heart meetings. I didn't get any traction at all. And literally, I realized, wait a minute, if you have a new idea, the orthodoxy does not embrace the new idea. This happens over and over again. And now there's entire textbooks of cardiorenal medicine. I was the inaugural editor of this. I was the endowed named visiting professor in Harvard in 2019 in both nephrology and cardiology. Now we have products, this entire class of product called SGLT2 inhibitors that improve both heart and kidney disease. It turns out I was right. So when I'm pointing out concerns that there was therapeutic nihilism regarding treatment of COVID-19, I just didn't criticize. It wasn't transcendent. I provided solutions with the published protocols we use to treat COVID-19 today. In the absence of anything else, when I went on Tucker Carlson, I said, Tucker, Harvard has no protocol to treat COVID-19 patients early at home. He goes, I can't believe that. I said, well, I'm going to fill the void. And I did. No one else, Harvard still doesn't have a protocol. And when people started developing blood clots, as you'll hear, heart damage and all these side effects from the COVID vaccines, was I critical? Well, I was making critical observations, not transcendent. But I, again, in the peer-reviewed published literature, published an approach of what I'm going to do in my practice, and we'll see what others come out. It turns out McCullough protocol-based spike protein detoxification is rapidly becoming a community standard, filling a void. To this day, again, we'll pick on Harvard, they have no protocol of what to do with somebody with a vaccine syndrome like myocarditis or blood clots or neurologic damage. So it's not transcendent, it's just making careful observations and in a sense, having the courage to put those out there in the peer-reviewed academic literature is what we're supposed to do.
I have no argument that there are definitely some side effects from all vaccines. You're a very good speaker. Your use of statistics is incredibly impressive. I won't try and decide, maybe decided that 97% of us have vaccine. Have COVID, that's interesting. I'm not sure how we can prove that or state it, but I'm going to let it go. The studies and the published literature says that the COVID vaccine saved 14.5 million lives worldwide, and if you add another 100 deaths in, 90 million lives. I'm a little confused as how you arrive at your statistics versus the published.
The 14 million lives saved was published by the Heritage Society in a blog. It's not the peer-reviewed published literature. It's not based on scientific observations. It's, in a sense, a wishful, aspiration that the vaccines will save lives. We must rely on the randomized trials, which showed no reduction in death, valid observational data that showed no observational death, no reductions in death. And let me tell you what, the FDA and CDC are the named sponsors of our vaccine program. If the vaccine saved lives, it would be in the consent form in the package insert, and it's not. They know it doesn't. They know it doesn't. The reason why COVID mortality went down is 3 reasons. One is that people contracted COVID. How many people in this room have had COVID-19 illness? There you go. So once you've had COVID, the next occurrence is characteristically milder. So natural immunity, number 1. Number 2, people sought early treatment. They started getting early treatment all over. And initially we didn't have government-issued drugs, and later on we did. They got early treatment. That's the reason why these drugs are out there, to reduce the risk of death and hospitalization. Third reason, the virus mutated to a far milder form. It's not nearly as severe as it was. So as we sit here today, our CDC statistics, the National Center for Health Statistics, says 1.2 million Americans died test positive with COVID at some time. At any time. So that means died here, test positive 6 months earlier. Not at the same time, not of COVID illness. National Center for Health Statistics data, half of those deaths, there was no pneumonia on the chart. So being COVID test positive somewhere else. It's a way of epidemiologically, in a sense, counting a death as a COVID death, but it creates a gross over-exaggeration. The French believe only about 3% of the test-positive cases truly had adjudicated COVID. I've looked at our data. I think it's about 10%. So listen, 120,000 Americans really did die of COVID-19. My data and my inference as a practicing expert doctor, I've published more on COVID than I'm sure anybody who's ever been here at Chautauqua, is that most of those lives would have been saved with early treatment, not with a vaccine.
I got it.
I'm very present.
I see that. Dr. McCullough, thank you for your talk. I appreciate it. I now turn that I am also Chautauquan. I am a very deep learner, and I'm very curious. I'm also the mother of an autistic child. I'm also a Stanford-trained doctor, and most important to this discussion, I've practiced at one of the highest acuity emergency departments in the last 30 years, professor of emergency medicine, have seen over 30,000 patients. My comment is, look deeper. There is more to this story. I will tell you, as boots on the ground, when everybody else was quarantined, and I was trying not to bring COVID home to my family, it was not the first year that was terrible to work in the ER. It was the second year. And this is why. You would see patients coming in, sick as crap, who weren't vaccinated. And because they were not vaccinated, they were clogging up our hospitals. So if your nephew came in with appendicitis, or you came in and needed acute dialysis, we didn't have the nursing or the space to take care of them. We had people die in our emergency departments for things they should not have died. So look deeper. Look deeper. Thank you.
You know, I wish the randomized trials showed reductions in hospitalizations and deaths, and they didn't. And those patients who came to the hospital, they came because they did not receive early treatment at home. Whether they were vaccinated or not vaccinated, if patients are left untreated at home, and you're right, the Delta pandemic, and I treated hundreds, if not thousands of patients. The patients I treated never showed up at our ER, whether they took the vaccine or not. Remember, only half of you in the country were fully vaccinated. The vaccine could not have had an impact.
I love data. I have a question. Question of probabilities. What's the probability that a bad virus can actually evolve to attack humans versus the probability that SARS-CoV-2 was engineered by gene splicing onto the furred site to make and weaponize this virus intentionally?
I cite the U.S. House of Representatives Coronavirus Select Subcommittee on the investigations that concluded SARS-CoV-2, unlike what the administration told us, was engineered in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. It was intentional. Our national security apparatus agrees. All the agencies agree now. That's another area of great deception. People say, listen, I can't trust our governments because they didn't come out of the gate and tell us, listen, the US and Chinese were actively collaborating to create a more infectious and lethal virus. In those very first experiments, they were trying to also create a vaccine at the same time. This is called getting ahead of nature. United States, we have 13 of these biolabs in the United States, one in Galveston, Texas, and I think Trump was correct by issuing an order that the federal funding for all these biolabs needs to be halted and that we need an inventory of what's going on in our country. But when I mean great controversy and great deception, that's an example now. Anthony Fauci came out and said it did not come out of the Wuhan lab, and he knew the entire time it did, and yet he was directing America on what to do with this pandemic.
Have they looked at other things, environmental, all the environmental chemicals that are in the world now? I mean, we've killed out 80% of our pests in the last 30 years. Have they looked at other environmental chemicals that might be causing autism?
Autism is grossly understudied. For this pediatric emergency that we have, chronic disease emergency, very few research studies, no large-scale epidemiologic studies, no investigation into what are the determinants or the risk factors. Virtually no studies of therapy. The CDC's conclusion is we should just get ready for this tsunami with more special needs. If anybody can play a role here, you can and others, by activating your lawmakers and others to say, listen, this autism problem is not going away. It's getting very big, very rapidly. Let's have an all hands on deck to figure out what are the determinants, what are the risk factors, getting them under control, and then more importantly, getting these kids treated to do the best we can with them. I now have adults in my office with autism. When I was a kid, I can't remember a single kid with autism. Now we're flooded. How many of you know somebody in your circles with autism or a family struggling with it? This is astonishing here in Chautauqua.
Okay, she had one other thought.
Does the spike protein decrease over time in your blood?
We have credible evidence that the spike protein, or the spine on the surface of the virus, which the human body is contaminated with after the infection and then massively loaded with after the vaccines, that the spike protein can slowly go away. And we now have some bona fide measurements of spike protein in the bloodstream, which can demonstrate it can go away. But also alarmingly, I have a patient in my clinic who has circulating spike protein in his body after 3 vaccines, in his blood, now 3.5 years later after taking the shots. The human body is not supposed to be having the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein in the bloodstream after taking a vaccine. And there's no doctor here that can stand up and tell you that that's okay. It's not. Something is wrong. The spike protein is toxic to the human body. There's thousands of papers on this. It causes blood clots. It causes organ damage. It causes myocarditis. And doctors may be on the different side of the spectrum with me, but there's not a single doctor who can come up in front of you and tell you, yes, that's a good thing for the human body. It's not. The human body was not meant to have this circulatory protein in it.
One final question. Wait a minute. I have seen you on television with your wellness kit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a doctor, I don't play one on television, you do. The thing that comes to mind is, what is the efficacy of the drugs that are in there over a long period of time? It's like a go-to kit, you go, and what is in the kit?
So the wellness company, among several companies, offers pre-prescribed drugs in emergency kits. So you can do this. And they come in different applications for travel or for upper respiratory infections. And they have a blend of drugs, antivirals, antibiotics, steroids, inhalers. And we've worked carefully with the Federal Trade Commission, the FDA, and others on this. The drugs last in the bottles by the rating for 2 years. It's my experience that they can last much longer if they stay in a cool place and they're not open. But what this allows, with a guidebook and then telemedicine, this allows avoiding trips to urgent care in the ER for common medical problems. And so this has been a giant innovation if you were to have a bladder infection, or if you were to have a skin infection, or something else that could be, in a sense, diagnosed through careful evaluation, telemedicine, and then starting the medicine right away. But I can tell you, it's night and day when we start medicine right away, let's say for influenza, with FDA-approved drugs for influenza and secondary antibiotics, and waiting the typical 5 days before you go to the ER.
Ladies and gentlemen.